everyone, welcome back to Unveiling the Truth. I'm your host Nellie, and today we have a special guest with us, a Catholic, pro-life advocate, and author, Barry Forbes. Now, Nefertiti's not here to join us today, but we have a list of questions that she wrote down, and we're going to hopefully get some insight on his new book, The Eucharistic Storms. Well, I guess it's not new, it's old, but it's like super important for this time, and we did mention it in one of our videos. We quoted from it, so we're super happy to have you here. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Nellie. Awfully good to be here with you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, can you give me a little bit of background on your story? What made you become an author and specifically write about such heavy topics? Because writing a book is hard enough, but a Catholic book, that is super deep and hard to do. So, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I've been a writer for many years. I was an editorial writer. I was a script writer for many years. I wrote other books. I wrote a self-help book. The Eucharistic Storms, which I delivered about 8 years ago, its genesis is that I was listening to the predecessor to the Catholic radio. It was EWTN radio, I think, in those days. And it was the morning show. I was driving around somewhere in Phoenix, I think. And they had a guest, a woman had called up on the morning show on EWTN, and she said, "Receiving Holy Communion in the hand makes me uncomfortable. Is it the right thing to do?" And the host said, "Oh boy, not only is it the right thing to do, but the church encourages it." That's the way it was in the early church, and for 1,000 years, and the church really encourages you to do that. Don't feel bad about it. Go right ahead. And I thought, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Because I had already done a lot of reading, I was a reader, and I knew that wasn't quite true. So I started to do my research, and in the end, I ordered about 25 books, different books from the past, and some of them were 100 years old. Some of them were more current. A lot of them were from the 20th century, from theologians from the 20th century and also the 19th century. And I went through and I parsed them to look at what communion in the hand, where it came from, and why we had it today, and why, to me, it didn't make any sense, and nor did it make a sense to a lot of other people. Yes, we had communion in the hand for some unknown time in the early part of the church. We don't know, for the first 150 years, we have no idea how it was received. All the images and the pictures that you see, they're all drawings and paintings of how that's just in the painter's mind. Mm-hmm. There's nothing whatsoever in the Bible or in the early church fathers to tell us for sure how it was received. But for sure, from around 150 AD until close to 600 AD, at different times in the church, communion was received in the hand. We know that for sure. And there were probably good reasons for it, because the church was under persecution. Mm-hmm. They delivered communion. The faithful would receive it in their hands and take it home to homebound people. There were a lot of reasons for that. But right around 600, which would be Gregory the First, Pope Gregory the First, around 600, Father Adrian Fortesco wrote in one of his books that things had changed, and that communion in the hand had begun to switch, so that it was done differently in different churches. Some would receive communion in the hand, some would receive communion on the tongue. And from that period, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have high-speed travel, right? It took a while to spread. So from that period, from 600, for the next 400 years, it slowly changed, so that by around the year 1000 AD, it was completely obliterated. The only way to receive Holy Communion was on your knees and on your tongue.
Wow. So that being said, so there's a lot behind that. So that being said, why do you think they wanted it to be on the tongue and on the knees? So what makes our communion different than others that you would encourage people to receive on the knees and on the tongue, and why they did have it that way for so long?
Well, you have a lot of questions there.
Okay.
We'll do this one at a time. So why the switch did it occur that time? In everything that like Father Adrian could come up with at that time when he wrote his books, which would be early part of the 20th century, he never found an exact reason why, but he and Jungmann, another famous theologian in the 20th century, assumed it was because of abuse.
Oh.
Because you could receive it in the hand and you could do anything with it you wanted then. So you could use it for stupid things or you could use it for very evil things. And people didn't necessarily believe. You're standing there and you receive it in your hand. Is that what you do with God? Is that what you do? Right. That was the second reason. That's what they came up with, but there was no definite reason whatsoever that they could find. They could just see the change, and they could follow the trail of the change through those 400 years until we got about 1000 AD, and then, boom, it was completely different from that point on. It stayed that way, as we know, all the way up until 1969 with Memoriale Domini, and that's when things changed at that point, and they allowed communion in the hand. But in between that time, we had the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s.
Right.
The Protestant Reformation was taught that there is no real presence, that is not God. And the way to get rid of that concept in people's minds was to have people come up and stick their hand out and receive the symbol of the bread in their hands.
Oh, dear.
And that was the idea. So when we came up to 1969 and we came out with the new edict that allowed it, what we were really doing is that we were following the Protestant line. And in my opinion, from the research that I did and the reason that I wrote that book, that was the wrong way about going about it, because that would teach people that is not the real presence. And it's no big deal, and in which case, hey, let's go somewhere else. We can go to this church. The music's better.
Wow.
Right?
And I remember in one of the talks you gave, you were talking about how people before the Protestant Reformation, how people took the presence of God in the Eucharist so serious that they would even, like, when they did receive on their hands, there were like special conditions they would do. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Amazing. It was completely and radically different. There is no way that you can compare communion in the hand today with communion in the hand hundreds of years ago. There's no comparison whatsoever. When you receive communion in the hand, let's say the Nestorians are the best example of that. When the Nestorians were rediscovered in the Eastern Church back in like 1890, they were a breakaway sect that had disappeared from Catholicism but kept all of their practices from 1,000 years earlier. So how did they receive Holy Communion when they did? And they still received communion in the hand from thousands of years earlier. So they followed everything. But when they received it, you had to wash your hands, I think 3 times, I'm not sure, before you went up to receive that. If you were a woman, you put a dominica in your hand, which was like communion cloth, right? You received it on your hand. They had a censer that blew smoke, I think, right, upon the hands and upon the Holy Eucharist. I mean, they really took it seriously. It was radically different. There's no way that you could compare the two. So the radio host on EWTN way back then, when I heard him, that's what he was doing. He was comparing communion in the hand with today, with that had occurred 1,500 years earlier, and you can't do that. There's no comparison whatsoever.
Right. Well, and they would very rarely receive on the hand anyway, right? Because there was a point in time where it was only for the consecrated hands of the priests and deacons.
Yeah, I've kind of forgotten that because that was a pretty short period.
Okay.
But there was a time way back in the early church where not everybody would go up and receive Holy Communion every time they went to church. There were strict rules, and you could be barred for serious sin. You could be barred from a church for a year.
Wow.
There was no way you could even get near the. They were very serious about it. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was different.
And do you think they should still have that? Like, what do you think caused, like, the stray from that to now, where everybody just receives it on the hand, so, like, unconsciously and disrespects and, like, rubs it and everything like that? So what do you think was, like, the downside of that? Do you think Vatican II, or?
It's a very difficult question to answer because we came after Vatican II.
Okay.
And My audience knows this. Before Vatican II, when people received Holy Communion, there were a heck of a lot of people who were in the pews who never went up to receive Holy Communion. Do you remember that? Yeah, there were a lot of people, right? So confession was such a big deal back in the 50s, when I grew up, right? The 50s and the early 60s. So you made sure that there was no mortal sin of any kind, right?
Absolutely.
And over the last 40 or 50 years, that changed dramatically. How many people, when you go to a Catholic church today, who sit in the pew and do not go up to receive communion? Very, very few.
Yeah.
But also very, very few. Confession kind of died away to a large part compared to what it used to be. So at one stage, I went to a church in where I live in Phoenix. I went to a church that had confession for 30 minutes every Saturday, and it was a big parish.
Wow.
Nope.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I'm wrong about that. I think it was 45 minutes. And he was a wonderful priest, a great priest. I really loved him, an ex-Jesuit who had come back to the church after leaving the Jesuit and become a diocesan priest. He was a great priest. I loved him. But 45 minutes, that gives you an idea. Very, very few people went to confession, but everybody went to Holy Communion. Why did that happen? Boy, that's a tough question. I would have a hard time answering that. It was a slow falling away.
Wow.
But does it come back to maybe the fact that when you look at the Holy Eucharist and what the Holy Eucharist means, does it come back to perhaps that you really don't believe that that's Christ himself, that's God? Is that a possibility? Because if you do that, then it really doesn't matter, does it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
None of that matters.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, it doesn't matter whether you're there or not in that case. Why would you be there? And that kind of explains a lot of the things that's happened in the church since that time. We've lost, and I used to know the number, we've talked about it in the past, but 125 million Catholics worldwide? Some huge number have walked out from the church and not come back. But in a discussion that we had earlier on today, I made the statement, and it's just my thought, that if you do believe that if you believe the Holy Eucharist is God himself, that is Jesus who you're receiving, and you believe that, and you still leave the church, I'm almost positive that someday you'll come back.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
You'll come back. You can live without God for some period of time in your life, but eventually when you hit the brick wall or when the light goes on or you read your way back in and you realize, wait a minute, right? Mm-hmm. There's only one place that I'm going to get the Holy Eucharist, and that's inside the Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to get it anywhere else. And that's going to draw those people back. So of those 125 million, maybe it's a smaller number. I have no idea. Obviously, a lot of them didn't believe it, and in which case they may not come back. Who knows?
Well, and I think I heard our priest here say something that it was like 70 or 75% of Catholics that don't believe in the true presence, and that's the source and summit of our faith. Like, that's why Catholicism is different, right? And do you think that one of the reasons why people stop believing would be because of poor catechism? Because like you said that you think that if they absolutely believe that that's the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, that they wouldn't fall away from the church. So do you think that could be the reason is poor catechism? Because I know that there was a distinct time from maybe the 50s to the 60s. There's just a generation where they didn't educate their people. They were more progressive,
Yeah, there was a long period of time where the teaching went away to a large degree. So there's no doubt about it whatsoever. I mean, if you're not taught that, and if you don't understand that, and you don't figure it out, or you don't read your way into it so that you understand that, there's no doubt whatsoever that's a big answer to that question. Wow. No doubt about it.
And so you think that that's just like a quick summary, that you think that that's the importance of receiving communion on the tongue rather than in the hands, is because that is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus.
That's God himself. How do you treat God when it's God yourself? I once met. I was at a book thing at a Catholic church in Phoenix where a speaker was coming to talk about a book that he had written, and it was a heretical book. And I wanted to come and hear him speak. I wanted to hear what he said, but I wanted to do my research ahead of the time. So I showed up at the church early. They were selling it at the church. And I bought his book, and there were two ladies there, and one of them was a nun, I think. I was pretty sure, and one wasn't. And somehow or other, and it was before I wrote this book, but I had already done a little research. I was already into it. This thing took me years to write because I had to really I had to dig deep into it.
Wow.
And we got into a discussion on it. And one of the ladies, I don't know if it was the nun or the ex-nun, I can't remember anymore. She said to me, and I'll never forget this, she said, when I see Jesus for the first time, I'm going to walk up to him, put my hand out, and I'm going to say, how do you do? And I said, sister, I wish you very good luck with that. Right? Right? But that gives you an idea of where mentally people were. Not, obviously not everybody, right? Mm-hmm. But certainly they were. And the people that were there that evening, my wife and I went to that event to hear that speaker. And there were dissidents there. I wasn't the only one. And, but most of the people were all in on it. They all agreed with this guy. And so I got it. I mean, I saw what was going on. But if you do that, if you don't believe that, I mean, well, yeah, you're gone.
Okay.
Right? Either mentally or physically, you're out of there, right?
And I think a lot of people might have a good mindset of like wanting to receive on their hands because, they want to be intimate with him and touch him. And, I heard that they want to like bring him to themselves. But don't you think that that's something that would rather be God feeding you through the hands of a priest, through the consecrated hands?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I don't think it makes sense to sit there and hold God like that. I mean, I just, that never made any sense to me. And I don't think it stands up to, again, if you do your research and you read the early fathers and what they believed the Holy Eucharist was and is, and the theologians that came after them, it's incredibly important that your actions follow your beliefs. If you believe that's God, then your actions should be. I mean, if you look at what did the three wise men do when they saw Christ, when they came in? They knelt before him. They prostrated themselves before them. The children of Fatima, what did the angel do? She prostrated herself before she held the Holy Eucharist up and suspended in air, and the angel of God prostrated herself or himself before that.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so did the children. And all of the early church fathers and all of the theologians throughout history have taught you to do that. And all of a sudden in 1969, hey, we don't have to do that anymore. Does that make any sense? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It didn't make sense.
Mm-mm.
That's why I wrote the book.
Wow. So there's obviously a lot of studying and facts that you put into this book talking about why it is important to receive not just on the tongue, but kneeling, like you said, almost prostrating yourself. So you obviously had a lot of importance, made it very an important point to make that it is God and to receive it on the tongue. But I'm particularly interested in the title Eucharistic Storms. So can you I remember you mentioned this before, I heard in one of your talks. Can you exactly mention what you meant by the Eucharistic Storms?
There are three major ones and dozens of minor Eucharistic storms. I found some of the minor ones, or a few of them, not many, and I figured out there were probably many more, but the three major ones are very simple. When Christ introduced his body and blood, what did a lot of his followers do? They said, this is impossible, and they turned around and walked away. That was the first storm. He lost many of them. From what I could determine from what I read, there were hundreds who turned around and walked away and never came back. Mm-hmm. That was the first storm. The second storm was the Protestant storm, and that was a bad one. The Protestant storm, we lost 40% of the church, I believe, in Europe. It was a huge number. It was huge. I don't remember anymore. It was 25, 40%. It was, and I know it's in the book there somewhere. They turned around. They didn't believe. They're gone. Because what did they teach? They taught that that's not God himself. That's just a symbol. And so we lost them. The third one is the one we're living through now, which is now it's changing. Because from 1969 on, we saw the church really disintegrate. I mean, the 125 million people are out. That's a lot more people than we lost with the Protestant Reformation, many times more.
Wow.
It's huge, right?
Wow.
That's the third storm. That's where the title came from.
Wow. That's amazing. And like obviously this is an important topic to discuss because there have been Eucharistic miracles as well. Like miracles that have proven that that is the body, blood, soul, and divinity. And I think it's really awesome that you're trying to get that out there to Catholics and even like cradle Catholics too. They're like set in that lukewarmness, and I'm super happy that you have books like this to get out there. And I really suggest this book to you guys out there because I read it and it's like so deep. I mean, you heard one of our videos where we quoted from it, just how they used to do it back then. It's insane. And I just give you props for that, for writing something like this.
It was very enjoyable to do it, and I was happy to do it, believe me.
Wow. And you also have other books too besides that one, right?
Yeah, well, right now I've got this is for kids. This is the Mystery Searchers book. You can get it on Amazon. There are 11 volumes. It's called Mystery Searchers book. It's for kids who are 10 to 15 years of age. It's very clean and wholesome book about 4 teenagers who are 16, 17 years old who fight crime and solve mysteries in Prescott, Arizona using technology. And I'm on volume 12 now. I have a publisher. I have a publisher, and I'm committed to do 15. So I have to finish the one. I'm on chapter 5 right now of volume 12, and I have to do 3 more that I haven't quite figured out yet. But this is volume 11 right here, which I just released about a week ago. So it's a brand new one, and they're fun, clean, wholesome, as I said, and highly, well, I think so anyway, highly entertaining. and they've got great reviews. And so they're certainly a lot of fun to do. And I'll be glad. I've got another couple of years worth of work, and then I have to figure out what I'm going to do next.
So now you know. So now you know that this guy has like a brain and can do deep topics, but is also like really down to earth and can write family books. That's super wonderful. So just to kind of close this off, what would you suggest to the people, and maybe more particularly the youth, in the reception of communion? Like, what did you want to get across with this book specifically? I mean, there's a lot in it. I highly suggest this book. Just completely different mindset of what we get in today. But what would you like to kind of summarize this? What would you tell the youth about it?
Well, first of all, although the book is deep, it's an easy read.
Oh yeah.
It's a read that it's written for lay people like me. Some of the books of the 25 or 30 books that I got in, they were very difficult to read, especially the ones that were 100 years old. I still have a couple that I haven't got through. They're monsters, and they were written 200 years old, and I'm going to attack them one of these days as well. But I would suggest, first of all, that for readers to read the book. But I would also note that, for example, when we went to Mass today, I'm in Farmington, New Mexico. We went to Mass at, is it Sacred Heart?
St. Mary's.
St. Mary's, yeah, wonderful parish. Did you notice that at St. Mary's that most of those young people knelt to receive?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I would tell you that where I go to Mass in the Phoenix area, it's the same thing, right? If it's a Novus Ordo Mass, it's the young people who are kneeling to receive for the most part. But the older people who do it, because we haven't done that for decades, right? And there are a lot of older people now that kneel as well, and they basically all say the same thing. Wow, it's wonderful. They get it because their actions are following their beliefs. And the young people that you're talking about who do not kneel to receive, try it. If you kneel to receive 2 or 3 times, if you can, there are churches where you can't. But if you do, in all probability, you will never go back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You think so?
I do. Oh. I do. Because you get it. You get it. This is a very special thing. This is God. You're doing your beliefs, your actions are following those beliefs, and it's very important to do that. In anything in life, right? Wow. No matter what it is. Wow. So yeah, I just try it. You'll love it.
Well, and you just mentioned how some places you can't do that. So would you suggest for the places that, even though it is heresy against the church to deny someone communion on the tongue or on the knees, it does happen because, like you said, there's that revolution that's happened where people are like trying to cut out the traditionalism. So what would you tell the people to fight back, or like what would you suggest for that for people who can't receive?
That's a big one, Nellie. Truthfully, I would tell them to change churches. I'd find another parish to go to. I would. If you have my son recently, or not recently, his son 3 years ago went to a church in the Phoenix area, and he has 8 children.
Wow.
And they were coming back, 'cause they have a cabin way up north, and they were coming back, and from the cabin on Sunday night, I believe. And they're Byzantine Catholics. And so even the small kids, they all receive Holy Communion, and they all receive on their tongue, standing. That's what the Byzantine Church does, has done that for all these 2,000 years. Okay? So when it came time to receive Holy Communion, my son and his wife and their 8 kids marched up to receive Holy Communion. They all received it on the tongue. Afterwards, when communion was over, the priest made a point. He said, in Christ, even Christ gave communion in the hand, which is not accurate. Nobody knows that for sure. You can interpret that when you read the words in the Bible, but if you study them, it can interpret it either way. It goes both ways. There's no way of telling. We do not know, right? But he singled out my wife, my son, and they'll never go back to that church. I mean, why? Why bother? Why fight it? Because the church they go to, it's fine. So I don't know. I've changed churches over the years, not necessarily because of that issue, but if somebody was going to fight me on that, I wouldn't bother. I mean, why bother? I'm like, fine, go ahead, because there are many churches now where you can receive kneeling and on the tongue, and there are kneelers up front. Or, as I told you, Nellie, before we started recording, at St. Anne's in Gilbert, Arizona, where I go to Mass on Sunday, they just redid the whole altar, and there's an altar rail, boom, completely all around the front. Everybody kneels to receive. Wow. And the one in Queen Creek, Arizona, I think is the same thing, the one that just opened up, 2 years ago? Same thing. There's a communion rail. So why fight it? If that's the way you want to do it and you're going to insist on it, okay, fine. But you can find a church in most places, or if you're in a place where you can't do that, and you can talk to your priest and you can give him a copy of this book and ask him to read it, and you can try to convince him and do the best you can. That would be my answer, Nellie. That's the only thing I can think of. Fighting on it, boy, that's a hard one. Is it? Some battles are worth it. This is one that it's going to take, as we talked a little bit earlier, maybe 50 years before it's going to work itself out. The last time it took 400 years to change. It's going to be a long haul. Wow. No matter how you look at it. But you don't have to be part of it. You can be part of the way to do it. Your actions should follow your beliefs.
Right. Wow, that is very profound. And I think that this book does a perfect job at just explaining why the importance of receiving on the knees and on the tongue. It's just wonderful to get that out there. And like you said with the communion rails, don't you think that just gives a beautiful proclamation of what's in the church, Like no other church has this.
This is what we believe. This is what we believe.
Wow.
We're following what we believe. This is God himself. Why not?
Thank you so much. This is perfect. And thank you for taking time out of your day to have this interview.
Wonderful to be back in Farmington.
Oh, good. Well, I'm happy you like it here. It's probably a big difference from Phoenix, right?
It's smaller and I love it.
You like it?
Are you kidding? Yes, I do love it. It's also a little cooler here.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for writing this book. I highly suggest this book. It's a wonderful book. It really gives you the depth of what you need to know about this stuff. And like he said, it will change your heart after you read this book on the importance of it. I can't thank you enough. You're a perfect inspiration to the youth these days. And just thank you for taking time for this interview. We really enjoy having you here.
Really, thank you. So wonderful to see you again.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for watching. Please support him. He has other books too. Like I said, very wholesome, down-to-earth guy, wonderful Catholic. He has a beautiful family. And thank you guys so much for watching. And we're praying for you, and keep that fire burning. Bye.